All right, everyone. Welcome to my second video as a part of the Modern College series. My first video was very raw, no practice, and the number one piece of feedback I got from all of you was to try to make it a little bit shorter. There's actually a secondary motivation here too, which is that I learned that LinkedIn will only accept native video that's less than 10 minutes. So our goal for today is to keep this video less than 10 minutes long. The topic for today is this concept of a gap year. And honestly, I think had it been any other year, I don't know if this video would have really had a lot of traction or made sense for a lot of people. But given all of the chaos that's ensuing in the higher ed space because of the kind of the impact of COVID, now suddenly this is a topic I think that more and more students are starting to think about. So I wanted to basically devote a video and an article to explaining how I would approach it if I was personally in the position of a college student and some of the things that you can look at. So I'm going to stick to the format I used last time and leverage some of my visuals here to help paint a picture. So this is kind of a overview of the newsletter I'm going to send out on Substack shortly. Shout out to my coworker Nikhil Joshi for talking me into this platform. But essentially, I kind of start off this newsletter by talking about how there's obviously going to be an impact from COVID, and as a result, it may make sense for some people to consider a gap year. So there's really like three main buckets I focus on here. So the first bucket is making sure you understand your university's situation. So what do I mean by this? I think, on the surface, you first need to understand what is their approach to the fall semester. There's been a lot of, sort of criticism to universities where they painted a very optimistic picture in the beginning of, we're gonna go completely open. I think any university that was suggesting that was fooling themselves. I do think there could be something to a hybrid, but even that is starting to have kind of some questionable results as we've seen at like sort of UNC. But anyways, like a lot of the universities are not going to be operating at their normal capacity, and it's important you understand what level they are. Are they going to be fully opening their doors? Are they moving everything online? Are they online with some people on campus? Are they online with campuses completely shut down? You should understand that. The second thing I want to bring up is that, not every university is going to be affected by this equally. In fact, some are going to be really crushed hard. So, it obviously wouldn't be an Alex Villegas video if I didn't reference Scott Galloway at some point in it. And so I think this is an article of his I actually referenced before, but what I liked about it was that he actually did this breakdown of basically separating out for, I think it was 441 schools in the U.S. News World and Report top national college rankings. He actually broke down where he thought those schools were going to land and actually mapped it on a sheet. So the four categories, right, were like basically, it was like thrive, I think, survive, struggle, and challenged. And it's funny, he actually changed the name of to challenge from perished before, because a lot of people gave him feedback of like, oh, you're scaring all my students. They think the school is going to go away. And even if it's a legitimate point, I can understand how that'd be bad for marketing. But anyways, the reason I bring this up is that I think if you're a student, right, and you are attending a university that's falling in this challenge bucket, aka they might not survive, you might want to consider seriously taking a gap year. And the reason is because there's a certain sunk cost, right, to sticking in a university program. And if that university is no longer here a year from now, your degree is not going to mean anything if you finish. And if you're in the middle of your coursework there, it's going to be a pain in the ass to try to like switch over to some new university, transfer those credits. It's honestly going to be a mess. So if your school is in this challenge category, or if you do a little research and you're hearing that they're really struggling with their budget, that is something you should factor into as well. The next thing that I highly recommend everyone look at is you have to reflect on your own situation, right? So, depending on the year you are in school, that should definitely have a big impact on your decision. So if you're, a junior and senior, I don't know if I would advise for a gap year personally. This is because number one, the subject material as you get further on in your degree, it'll start to be a much more additive, right? So I remember specifically, like I was originally in engineering and then eventually went to computer science. but there were a lot of like foundational subjects you learn about, whether it's, you know, in the mathematics space or like statistics or all this. They're like foundational courses. And then basically those are necessary prereqs for the more advanced courses. And so you run this risk of like, if you took all these prereqs and then you go an entire year without looking at that material, you might find yourself really kind of on the back foot when it's time to go into these courses. So that's just one thing I would factor in. It's also important to recognize that, you know, as a junior and senior, you've had time to get the college experience. You've done some networking already. So it's not going to be quite as damaging to your experience if you have to, you know, say spend like a year or so off campus. So just something to keep in mind. On the other hand, if you're a freshman or a sophomore, I think this question starts to get much more intriguing. So, you know, again, if I was a rising freshman, I think I would be definitely giving more credence to this idea of taking a gap year. You know, that first year is your most transformative year. It's when you create some of your best connections. I met people that'll be standing in my wedding that freshman year. I had some of my best memories by far. And, you know, just having that experience, I think, taken away could definitely, you know, affect from that. So that's just something to keep in mind. So I know I'm going to pause this video and close my email since it's going crazy. All right, back to the material. So outside of just, you know, that, I think there's another factor you can definitely keep in mind here, which is basically what's your financial situation, right? And so there's been a lot of reports of students and parents rightly pushing back to the universities of like, why are we paying the same ticket price for being online? It's clearly not, you know, the same product or service. Why would we have to pay the same? It'd be like if you went into you know, like a steakhouse and you were like, I want the filet mignon, and they brought out some like chicken nuggets and they were like, sorry, we just can't serve the filet mignon. Like you wouldn't expect to pay the full value. So it's like, why would you do the same for the university? So different universities are reacting differently. Some are offering subtle discounts, if not substantial discounts. Again, if you're someone who is already taking out you know, a lot of debt to help finance your college degree, this could actually be a positive because you essentially could, you know, save money over time. The other thing is there's this idea of like an arbitrage situation. And what I mean by that is that if you look at the average cost of like a community college, so this one report from Value Penguin, they say like a public 2-year in district for tuition alone is like $3.5 grand. I found this other one, it puts it slightly higher, up at like $4 grand for tuition. But regardless, the cost of tuition for community college is much lower than a public school. So there's sort of this arbitrage situation where maybe you go and you do a year or two at a community college, get all those gen eds done, right? And then you transfer in to the, you know, public or private institution and only have to pay for 2 years of the full ticket. And normally like the case against that would be like, well, it's not just about getting the education. It's like there's this experience you miss out on. But if no one's getting that experience from the school, then suddenly this idea of doing a year or two at a community college makes a lot of sense, right? Like, why would you not just get those classes done? It's not like the kids that are actually enrolled there are getting a better experience. So just something to keep in mind. And the last thing I would say here that you should really take into consideration is like, okay, maybe you go through these two things and it's starting to feel more and more like a gap year could be appealing to you. I think a gap year can be valuable, right? There's data from this group. It's called like the gap year or the year out group. I put this chart in my book, Modern College, but it basically highlights that a lot of students who take gap years actually end up doing quite well after, right? Like 90% of the people they surveyed for this study still enrolled in college. You know, over 2/3 of them took classwork more seriously. They had more sense of purpose from coming in and clarity. 60% decided what subject they wanted to study during that time. I think that's all great and well, but I believe that a lot of those results are predicated on students having a, you know, well thought out plan for what to do for that gap year, right? Whether it's, you know, you're going to take time to travel the world and get more experiences, so you have a more holistic worldview. Maybe it's like doing a co-op or an internship. Maybe it's doing some volunteer program, like, you know, AmeriCorps or like Peace Corps or something like that. Like, I think when you have a program like that, it can help a lot. The problem is with COVID, obviously, a lot of those things aren't happening. So like traveling the world is not really a thing right now. A lot of these programs, I'm sure, are getting hit. So it's just something to keep in mind is that if your situation is going to be that you taking a gap year is you living in your parents' house and basically just like fooling around on the internet or like not really doing anything, watching Netflix, I'd say just enroll in school, right? Like you should have a legitimate plan of what you're going to do. Even if that plan is to take like some online courses or something through a third party, like you should have something there. And one last resource that I'll put out is there's this program called Gap Year Association I found. They seem to do a lot of really good stuff around finding programs, you know, for placing people. I'm sure they've like adapted this a little bit to COVID and all that, but it's just something to keep in mind that, you know, you really want to make sure that you're doing something good for that year if you do decide to take off. And I'll kind of end by saying this, you know, obviously this is not the most ideal time to be a college student. I recognize that, you know, most of society recognizes that. That being said, you know, I would use this as an opportunity as well. It's a chance to be more introspective, ask yourself, why are you in college? Maybe for you, it does make sense to take a gap year based on what I laid out. But either way, keep your head up. You know, this crisis will indeed pass eventually. And when it does, you want to position yourself to be in the best place possible. Thank you all again for listening. Make sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel and my new newsletter I'm doing on Substack. And lastly, if you enjoyed the content you heard here, I have my book, Modern College, still available on Amazon. Take care, everyone, and best of luck.